editor for the Washington Post, and she's on the line now. Karen, good morning to you. Do we have Karen? Right. I think we're going to reconnect with Karen eventually. I just wanted to acknowledge her presence, and then you can continue.
Yes, thank you. So, like I was saying, that is why we find the whole conduct of police in what happened last Saturday very, very unfortunate. And when you look at how the position of police, I wish police we have a representative to perhaps speak to these issues.
We're still working on it.
Very well.
Since yesterday, we've been trying to get one of them.
Because I recall that when Ernesto was arrested and we got to the regional headquarters, I confronted one of the police officers and asked that, why the arrest? The police told me that, how can you give us notice yesterday and conduct an event today? And I was like, well, if it was about short notice, you could have simply written to them and told them that
the notice is short.
Is short. But then I realized that that wasn't true, because the notice went there on the 1st of June, so it had more than 6 days. And like something clearly put it, all you need to give is, he said, not less than 5 days notice.
Right.
So once you give a notice within that space, you are good. Then the second thing that happened that night.
Francis, forgive me for cutting in.
Very well.
I think we have Karen, and I apologize for this. So Karen has been awake for quite a while because of the time difference to speak to us. So if you don't mind, I'll ask your indulgence to engage Karen for a moment. Karen, good morning. Thank you for your time. Hello, Karen.
Hello?
Yes. There you are. Thank you so much for staying up so late to speak to us. We really appreciate it. Now, of course, the Washington Post has been writing about, publishing about the recent Black Lives Matter movement, which was kick-started by the unfortunate event of the killing of George Floyd. But it has now taken a global perspective, and everybody everywhere seems to be wanting to be in on this. Tell us, how has the Washington Post coverage of this also gone global as the movement has?
Sure. So I would say that the Black Lives Matter movement, at least in the U.S., has been around in this particular iteration since 2014, since the killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. So this sentiment, it touched off protests in Ferguson, and we were all watching. And so now, 6 years later, with the horrific killing of George Floyd that was caught on tape, on camera phone, it has exploded into this obviously nationwide and global protest against racism and police brutality. I think this time, as far as the Post, I sit on the opinion side. And so part of my job is to help guide coverage, and I write myself. And I think personally, the entire world is looking at America's serious issues with violence and racism, and I like to call it ethnic violence, the way that we tend to talk about Africa. And I think that we're also having a pandemic which has claimed 110,000 lives. So it really is putting a spotlight on the, the serious fundamental issues that America has. And so I think, the Post, at least, in my sphere, we are doing our best to try to cover it in a way that reflects the fact that Black people are fed up. They're tired of the racism, of the brutality, of the discrimination. This time it feels different.
Now, several opinion leaders in your society have taken sides on this matter, and social media shows just how divided people are on this, which ought to be a rather straightforward issue. Black lives do matter. What is the source of division here? What is it that makes it a confusing issue for some Americans?
Well, I think from sort of the beginning, when Black Lives Matter became a real sort of rallying cry 5 or 6 years ago, it was quite uncomfortable. We saw the backlash in a way saying, well, don't say Black Lives Matter, say all lives matter. And the whole thing is, well, of course all lives matter, but the issue that we're seeing here is that Black people are disproportionately affected by police brutality, by housing discrimination, job discrimination. So this is a specific issue. And I think, honestly, it's a long-standing discomfort that many white Americans, white people in America have with confronting an ugly, ugly history of slavery, of segregation, of discrimination. And I think so now that we're seeing, we're seeing a lot more people at least willing to listen. I think at this point we're almost 2 weeks out from the Floyd's murder, and we see a lot more people finally sitting back and listening. Now, would this have happened if we didn't have a pandemic and a lot of people are out of work and they'll have to go to a job tomorrow morning, so they're out in the streets? I mean, maybe that's part of it. But I think this time it feels different for now. It feels like people are finally getting it. So we'll see.
Now, it appears that one of the reasons why this movement is meeting resistance is the president. The president seems to have a problem with this. We were reading reports recently of a letter he wrote in which he described peaceful protesters as terrorists. As the media, how do you even deal with a situation where the president of the nation seems set against the people of the nation?
That is a very good way to put it. I mean, I think as a Black journalist, and many journalists of color have been warning against President Trump, even when he was a candidate, his racist rhetoric, calling Mexicans rapists, when, white supremacist racists demonstrated in Charlottesville a few years ago saying, oh, those are very fine people. We've known that this president has run on policies that are racist, that are designed to favor white people. And so I think it is not surprising that he is calling us terrorists. He's been running on a platform, honestly, that appeals to a lot of white anger and white grievance, and I think a lot of, you can definitely make the case that Trump's election itself was a backlash to the election of America's first Black president, Barack Obama, right? So when there's progress, there's very often backlash in this country. And so I think Trump is a part of white backlash. And so, yes, we had seen in the early days calls for, even a few days ago, a sitting senator calling for military force to crush the protesters. But honestly, I think that messaging has been drowned out. You're seeing, even 2 weeks later, our cities, our capitals, our towns, are flooded with anti-racism peaceful protesters, hundreds of thousands. So the message isn't resonating. What's resonating is people finally saying, okay, we need to fix this. We need to do something. We need to defund the police. And that is happening in certain cities, something that I never thought I'd ever see. So it is quite a spectacular moment right now.
Now, I suppose the thing that's unique here is that the office of the American president is quite arguably the most powerful political position in the world. Donald Trump has already flexed those powerful muscles on a number of occasions in this Black Lives Matter movement. He sent the military to disperse peaceful protesters, well, largely peaceful protesters, outside the White House. And came out to take a picture. So is there a fear amongst the citizens that he might actually make full use of the power of his office to quell and dominate, in his own words, citizens who wish to make a point, and kill this movement before it can be effective?
To be honest with you, I don't think that's really a fear. A lot of it was bluster. I mean, this president was basically hiding in his bunker before staging what we all knew to be a photo op, a stunt, clearing protesters out just so that he could wave around the Bible and, talk about this rhetoric. To be accurate, a lot of members of the military have publicly come out and said, that they, or former military and Department of Defense have come out and said that they do not believe in using force and being used as a political tool against peaceful Americans. So I think, if anything, I think that in a lot of ways in the media, yes, we do tend to focus on Trump's rhetoric, and this is true, that, the way that the U.S. works out very often is the states feel that things are out of control, then the states can call in the National Guard. But to be honest, the real picture is things are peaceful. Actually, curfews are being lifted in certain cities. I believe that the military force has been withdrawn from Washington, D.C. So there's not even a demonstrated need for the military. It's not that the police are being attacked and overwhelmed and that there are armed protesters. That is not what's happening. If anything, we're seeing it's the police who have been bludgeoning protesters, who have been shoving elderly people to the ground, firing tear gas point blank, arresting journalists. Like, that is the local violence that we're seeing. It's coming from the police, not from the protesters. And I think that is what is shocking America's conscience right now, is seeing how brutal and acting with complete impunity our local police forces are. But that hasn't stopped people. They're still going out into the streets.
So there have been calls recently, Karen, for the disbandment and abolition of police forces as we know them. This is new. Why is this being considered at even the level of lawmakers? Is it practical? What would the alternative be? What alternatives are even being proposed? What would America look like without a police force?
That, even to me, some of these ideas have been credited to, even Angela Davis, black feminists from decades ago, who called for this different sort of imagination of even the definition of what it means to be safe, and have a safe community. And I think just today, even, or yesterday, our time in the U.S., the Minneapolis Police Department, they've defended them, and I think when people are saying defund the police, it is at a very basic level. Usually, the ask is to say, well, let us use that money to instead fund local initiatives to instead build up communities, provide jobs, build up education systems, instead of what police forces that so many communities feel are just being paid to terrorize them, to find them, to arrest them for petty things, and then introduce them into a system with which you keep paying the city, bail, fines, whatever, court fees, that keep people poor, actually. And so I think right now, people are really questioning, because crime rates in the U.S. have not gone up. Actually, violent crime has gone down in the last few years. So, but yet the police brutality and these incidents, just from what we see on camera, seem to be going up. So, yeah, I think obviously it's city by city, and different cities have different realities. But what would that look like? I mean, we're not sure, but I mean, the cities will tell us. But I think people are willing to gamble on this experiment because you're saying we are tired of the status quo. This is not acceptable, right? So we'll see what the week has to bring. But even for myself, as an American, as a Ghanaian with Ghanaian roots, I'm stunned. I am stunned. I never thought this was radical even a year ago to think about at this level, and now it seems to be happening within a matter of weeks. It's just stunning, really.
Yeah. Well, the world continues to watch in fascination and, of course, in support of the American people as this saga unfolds. Karen Atia, I can't thank you enough for staying up so late to talk to us. We appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Karen Atia is the Washington Post Global Opinions editor, speaking to us from that city. But wow. All right, well, that's the big picture, right? And it narrows in to this event that occurred on Saturday here in Accra, when the Economic Fighters League organized a vigil, first of all to mark the brutal killing of George Floyd, but also the injustices that all culminate in the concept Black Lives Matter. These injustices can be found all around the world, including here in Ghana. And so they came out with placards to protest, to commemorate, because it was a vigil, not a protest, to commemorate those whose lives have been lost in the cause they were furthering. Now, the lawyer for Ernesto Yeboah, who's the leader of the Economic Fighters League, who spent the night in jail, is here with us and has been trying to give us some glimpse of their position on this matter. So, Francis, before we went to Washington, you were explaining to us the reason why, from your perspective, your client, first of all, didn't commit any crime whatsoever, and secondly, was unlawfully detained.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Arrested. And then arrested and unlawfully detained.
Right. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, like I was saying, I mean, unless there is a clear law, or let's say a conduct is a crime, if it is described to be a crime and penalty prescribed for them. And in this instance, even at the point of arrest, police could not tell Ernesto exactly the reason for the arrest. Then again, the reason even for the detention, I recall when I got there and I was asking, well, you are okay, it's okay if you arrest, but once you've arrested, you should be able to take his statement so that you can admit him to bail. They said, well, they had instructions from some superiors, and that it's impossible for him to be granted bail that night. We did everything possible, but that couldn't happen, and we had to come the following day. And for me, what was worrying, like I described earlier, was how police could use live ammunition to disperse some few people who were simply chanting "Free Ernesto, Free Ernesto, Free Ernesto." Right. And for me again, it dovetails into the bigger picture. When you look at the underlining causes of what is happening in America, maybe in Ghana it may not necessarily be a racial discrimination, but of course we know we have economic discrimination. Many people who have died out of police killing are not people of the rich and powerful and the most influential. Right. If you look at the record, mostly people who are themselves victims of their society already and find themselves at the wrong places, and then they get into a trouble, then there is shootout and they die. And the biggest question for me, and that's the more reason why I associate with this Economic Fighters League, was in 2018 in Ghana, we had nearly about 20 people who died as a result of police shootout and police brutality. Right. The question is that as we speak here, as we sit here today, we don't have any report from the Ghana Police Service that is giving us an insight into what exactly happened to the officers who were involved, whether they've been interdicted, whether they are standing trial for either murder or manslaughter. We don't know that. We don't know what has happened to the victims of those crimes. And for me, these are the things that worries me in respect of all these things. And the American example should not only be our association with America, and just as even our Ministry of, I think, Tourism did, should not only be commemorating and just showing support and showing solidarity, but it must actually translate into what we do with ourselves in respect to the matters that happen in Ghana, people who have died as a result of police brutality and so on and so forth. And that is what has been the main issue on the table for me. And I think that is what the Economic Fighters League was interested in, and not just because of a vigil, just because of George Floyd. George Floyd was the key reason why they were there, but beyond that was to create the awareness that as a country we need to improve our security network. Police need to improve their professionality, particularly in this year when we have an election year. Very soon activism is going to increase. Media will be all over the place searching for information. Political actors will be out there doing politics. What would happen to them, and how is police going to handle those situations? Right.
We certainly will watch and see how this case unfolds. We're going to take final words from Samson. Samson, just before you give us your final wrap on this, I have a specific question here that I want to ask. And I'm going to quote the president here in his most recent address to the nation. Okay, he said, and I quote, "Marketplaces, workplaces, public transport, and constitutional and statutory bodies such as the Electoral Commission, the National Commission for Civic Education, and the National Identification Authority, whose activities were exempted from the outset from these restrictions, must conduct their activities in accordance with social distancing and the necessary hygiene and safety protocols." Here, it sounds like the president is saying that these institutions, the EC, NCCE, and the National Identification Authority, their activities were exempted from the original restrictions. Is that the case? The original EIs, did they exempt these institutions from the bans on public gathering and so forth?
So it's one issue that myself and very many lawyers and senior lawyers at that are befuddled at the pronouncement of the president, because if you look at it very clearly, what the president said does not exist. I have heard the information minister suggest that the president was the maker of the law. So since he's the maker of the law, what he said was the law or was not the law is final. I will excuse him, because if you are not in the practice of the law, you may be permitted to skip and theorize in certain extent. It's clearly not the case. I've heard the argument that look, if you listen to even the EC itself, it was issuing official correspondences, and in those official correspondences, it acknowledged that it was prohibited, and therefore said it was going to conduct a particular meeting with the parties and their representatives pursuant to the prohibition, as in the room allowed under the prohibition. So if you like, read their letter to the parties for their last IPAC meeting. I'm sure their lawyer would have been the first to advise them that you are exempt, so you don't need all of these things, because they have already, been in the eye of the storm before for having done one thing or the other. So clearly, I've heard some suggest within the lawyers within the party, as in politicians who are lawyers within the NPP, suggest that first of all, the president could not have even sought to prohibit the EC, because it's a constitutional body. And I'm like, what a lame argument. You can find that. Look, the judiciary is independent. It had to be exempted before it could do what it had to do. In fact, even members of parliament had to be exempted. Okay? So the independent constitutional bodies need clear exemption because the law was a law for the entire country. It had national application. But to go to the point we are discussing and my concluding remarks on those. See, the police recently suffered an embarrassment in the courts. And people don't understand. Those who don't understand why sometimes I ask why we make the announcement and then it takes forever before the EI comes out. Somebody pleaded guilty because the person had been arrested on account of having violated an EI. The person pleaded guilty. Do you know what the court said? The judge said, look, your plea of guilty, I'm not even taking it because I don't have a copy of the EI to assist me to know that what they are saying you have done is prohibited by law.
Wow.
That's the embarrassment the state faced in a courtroom. Now, the legal principle, very general, global, applied legal principle that ignorance of the law is no excuse, simply means and brings an obligation upon lawmakers to do two things: publication of the law to the world and accessibility of that law, because ignorance of the law is no excuse. So the law ought to have been published and published to the world, and it ought to be accessible, not like when we were in the military regime and we have heard stories of how people went to court and a law was made midnight and then is used against them. It is the Attorney General who only has that law, picks it out of their pocket and says, this is the law we are using against you. We are in a democracy. You would have heard Bryce Simmons say something on Newsfile, and it struck me. He spoke about what he's worried about, which he called oral governance. Oral governance. Okay? Once again, what the president says is not law. It must be in an EI. In fact, in legal jurisprudence, there are those who hold the view that EIs are not exactly law. Okay? And therefore, EIs must be exhaustive. They must be thorough. They must be clear. And they must not lend themselves to lawyers and interpreters of the law having now to go search for reasons, like I try to do now, to say, if you look at the general disposition of the new easing and the prohibitions, it will sound like what they did may have been wrong. But once again, the Constitution is supreme. Nothing is a crime unless it has been specifically defined in a law and the sanctions have been prescribed.
I think that's a very thought-provoking submission there by Samson Ladi Anyanini. I want to thank you very much for your time. And of course, this just means that we need to deliberate more and figure out what exactly we are allowed to do and what we are not allowed to do, based on what is in the law and what is not. More on that. But coming up,
COVID-19, the deadly virus which has spread to every continent on the globe.
What's it like to actually have the coronavirus and undergo treatment?
Via Zoom is epidemiologist Akif. Ghana records 5,408 COVID-19 cases.
We have to cut down on the numbers.
We need to cut down even on production.
About a third of the revenues are not coming in.
For 1 month, the paper was off the stands.
Hotline returns with a